So, welcome to part two. If you've watched part one, then you will know exactly where we've left off because we have not touched anything in this quest since you have watched the last video. Everything is the same. We want to keep things as consistent as possible. So, in this episode, we're basically just going to talk about basic scripting. We're going to be talking about a lot of opcodes that are going to be pretty much in every single quest you ever look at. Um, I also want to mention before we get into the scripting that if you ever wanted to look at a Sega quest or just a quest in general, you can go to the Qedit wiki page, hit the quests button, and you get a whole ton of lists of basically every single Sega quest that's ever existed on here, even some episode 4 stuff. Just keep in mind that these will be Blueburst quests, so they will be the Blueburst versions. So just keep in mind for that. With that being said, let's begin the scripting. You wanted to start with some function zero stuff, right?
Yes, we're going to flesh out function 0 so that it's more consistent with some other quests. We're just going to add some basic functionality to it that allows the quest to have options later on the line. We're not going to test the quests in this episode, but we will do a lot of preparation for the next one. So this one's going to be a lot of coding and a lot more writing than it is actual playing. So as we see here, we have it already set to just have the two areas, Pioneer 2 and Temple, and have the warp set. But we do need some more things in here for later functionality in the quest. So I'm going to set a opcode that's called get slot number, and we're going to set this to the reserved register 250, and we're going to insert this into function 0.
Since we didn't mention it before, if you don't add a label to your when you go to add an opcode, it goes directly in the function that you're adding it in. So if you don't add a label, it'll go into function zero in this case. If you start to add a label, it'll put it in its own function. Get difficulty level 2 is basically a function that you can use later to show the player or have a specific interaction within the quest that basically tells the player, hey, this is difficulty level whatever this is, and you can basically do a lot of different things with it. We'll show it later more with what you can do.
The color of the opcode also tells you which version it comes from. Green comes from version 1, blue comes from version 2, red comes from version 3, which is GameCube and Xbox, and purple comes from Blueburst. Since we're making a quest specifically for GameCube, we're not able to run Blueburst opcodes, but it can freely run opcodes of any previous version that exists. So the colors don't necessarily mean anything for us. Just make sure that we don't run Blueburst opcodes, because that will crash us.
Right.
This last opcode I put here is initial floor. This basically tells the quest from your areas in the top left corner which one do you actually start the quest on. By default, it already sets it to 0, and it's just good penmanship to have initial floor in function 0 anyway, but it's not out of the ordinary to have some quests start off of Pioneer 2. So keep that in mind with this opcode. This is just for cleanliness.
Yeah.
From this point, we're going to start writing some other ones for some more functionality in the quest. Most Sega quests have function number 1 with just an opcode ret. It's just a way to have a cop-out to always have access to 1. The function you set is determined by the number you put in the label box, and you can have functions ranging from 0 to like 20,000. So the only stipulation is if you go too high or if you start having too many functions, your quest is going to start to become big. It may become unstable. So generally, you shouldn't have more than, say, 1,000. anything over 1,000 is probably high-end Sega territory. From this point, we're going to make another one that an opcode, a function that is going to disable and enable movements. So here we're going to make a disable movement opcode. The one we want is disable movement 2. This is because this one specifically takes a register, if you can tell from the window. So if we have it register from register 250, it's saying you disable movement for the person who is using the value in register 250. Because function 0 sets your slot number in that register, it keeps track of who you are and disables your movement accordingly. For get slot number, player 1 is 0, player 2 is 1, player 3 is 2, and player 4 is 3. If we used an older version of this, we would have to individually set each player. In this case, we're just able to use it with one opcode, so it makes the script a lot cleaner. And as always, functions need to always end with a ret.
Yeah, you'll find that if you look at quests long enough, a lot of what Sega did is, um, especially with later versions, is they remade a lot of opcodes to have a more simpler function. This is especially true for Blueburst. They repurposed a lot of opcodes just to make them more simpler. You can just call them lazy, but it's lazy slash smart in the same vein, I guess.
Next, we're going to do a pretty important opcode. We're going to talk about a set floor handler.
So what this opcode does is it basically uses a floor number, and it D word would be the floor number, and function would be the function that this floor handler would jump to when you go to it. So in this case, um, with floor handler 0 and function 3, this is going to jump to function 3 when you get to floor 0. So the floor 0 is always going to be Pioneer 2. And set floor handler 1 is going to jump to function 5. So that's basically what this opcode says or does.
And I'm going to write function 5 next. I put all that in function 0 so that it's all ready to go for later. So function 5, remember to always put the label in a new function. This one is going to have a sync. This function is going to be set up to determine when that poison lily that we set up in part 1 is confirmed dead and the door unlocks. We're going to write something that happens for when the door opens.
So sync, what is a very basic opcode that you will see in basically every quest. It just tells the game to wait one frame. One frame. There's 30 frames in a second. So if you put 30 syncs, the game will wait 1 second. Now, if switch pressed, this is basically going to be a opcode that checks to see if a switch is pressed. It's as simple as I could put it. And there's going to be a bunch of other opcodes that go with it as well. The function he's writing or the opcode he's writing right now is jump by, which it basically jump. The best way you can look at it is jump if. So he's reusing register 3. And you're basically...
It's not obvious from the opcode itself, but if switch pressed uses 3 registers. It checks the first 2 to determine which door it needs to confirm, and the results get put into register 3. So when register 3 equals 1, this will jump to function 6. Now, obviously, if the door is locked, it's not going to be 1. So what we do here instead is we just put a regular jump, and we have this loop back to function 5.
Yeah, so it'll basically create a endless loop for you just to continuously check to see if the switch has been quote unquote pressed.
Even though this function jumps continuously back to 5, it would still be safe just to put a ret in case it breaks for some reason, so that we don't have a crash occur.
Yeah, you always want a ret ending a function, even if the game will never see the ret. Sometimes things happen that are unexpected, and essentially, it's always good to have.
This opcode window message uses a string. This is the one that pops up in the middle of the screen. We're just going to make it confirm that the door unlocks so that you see it when it occurs. Whenever you have something that writes on the screen, you need to have an appropriate opcode that also closes it. For this one, it's going to be win end. This closes the window. If you do not put this opcode in this situation, the window would just stay on the screen pretty much forever.
Yep, you'd have no way of closing it. Additionally, you could also call function 2 and 3 to disable movement and enable it if you want the player to stop while that window message pops up.
We'll add that in after this one. This one will take a little description.
So switch call. So this one's a bit more complex. Basically, what he's going to do is he's going to create a switch that has a different outcome depending what difficulty he's using or what difficulty the player is in. So he's doing register 252, and I'm going to move this window for a bit. Mm-hmm. If you remember, we made get difficulty level 2 and register 252. So basically this is just reusing that register that we set in function 0. So what this basically means is there's 4 switches because there's 4 difficulties. And by default it will go normal, hard, very hard, and ultimate. So that's basically what this is doing. So it will look at when it gets to this opcode, it's going to look at these functions. 10, 11, 12, and 13 are going to be functions that he's going to write.
And it's determined by the value that's put in register 252 here. Say, for example, we start the quest on very hard. Get difficulty level will set register 252 to 2 for very hard. So the function it calls in this case is going to be 12, and 12 is going to be written as you are in very hard difficulty. Oh, looks like I also forgot to advance the numbers.
I will say that there is a lot of room for error in Qedit. There are definitely more wrong ways to do something than right ways. So if you make mistakes, don't feel bad. We've all made them before. And basically what he's doing here is just a simple, you are in X difficulty for each switch that you could possibly hit with the register. Very simple. There's a lot of more complex things you could do with switch calls. Some Sega quests use a 16 switch call. Don't ask me why. They have that in there as an option. I have personally used a 10 switch call where you can basically make a different switch for every section ID. So there's a lot of options you could do with switch call. I don't know what the maximum is. I'm sure it's probably around 15 or 20. So I wouldn't go much higher than that.
I did this in the order I'm doing it in because I want to put all the windows first and then individually put a win end for each.
Yeah, Qedit will store the last thing you entered as a opcode. So sometimes it's most convenient to do all of your specialized text first, and then if you're going to do the same opcodes in each function, you can just add and then add really quickly.
what Kayak had said earlier was that we can use the disable and the enable movement that's in function 2 and 3 for this window message when the door is unlocked. So what we'll do here is we'll add in the beginning of function 6 to call function 2.
Yep, and so what that will do is it will call the disable movement, and it'll disable the movement for every player that hits that function in the quest. So, and then when you close the window, it'll call function 3, which will re-enable your movement, and you can go on business as usual throughout the quest.
Calls are like a way for the script to go in a different order. If you remember from part 1 where I said it works in a top-down format, if we run just function 0 and we go on Pioneer 2, everything in this order will happen, and then the floor handler, which is function 3, occurs, but there's only one opcode in here, and then it returns the movement to the player. As you can see here, there's not much interaction, but if we were to go to temple and function 5 occurs, the switch is pressed, we can see that it'll jump to function 6 through this, and then function 6 calls function 2, which will sandwich 2 right where call 2 is, play 2, and then continue off where 6 left off until it meets 3, and then it'll call 3, place 3 in the same spot, and it'll go until it hits the ret that's in 6. Without a ret, a call will continue from that top down. If this function 3 did not have this ret here, it would immediately play into function 5, and we don't want that to happen. So when we call 3, we want to make sure that whatever happens in 3 only occurs from 3. Because then when it returns to function 6, then it will also return control to the player. Last thing to mention from this one is these leadies. These ones just set a register to a value. Some other ones, like let, makes a register of register value. So this compares two registers and sets one to be the exact same as the other.
So that will be it for this video. In the next part, we will start covering how to write a NPC in the script and how to place them, and we'll actually be testing the work we did in this part and in the next part as well. So thanks so much for coming. See us in the next part.